Hello Yu-Gi-Oh players, I'm the RJB0 and welcome to the final installment of Yuginomics 101, where I teach you the simple economics behind Yu-Gi-Oh and you learn how to make a profit and build your binder with no scams and no luck necessary. In the last video, we learned how supply and demand dictate the price of a card. We learned that by way of a couple of examples, including why cards are so expensive right after a sneak peek. If you haven't watched the videos before this one, go ahead and watch them now. It'll make a lot more sense after that. And this is the video that you have all been waiting for, where all that stuff comes together and I teach you one of the easiest ideas in all of economics and show you how that can help you to make a big profit. Before I get started on that, I have to say this. This trick doesn't apply so well to newer and more hyped up cards. This all has to do with planning and looking into the future, and that's very difficult to do with very recent decks. So if you do want to use those decks, I'd say use your judgment and decide whether it's worth the price. And if you get newer cards, it's down to your knowledge of the game and your knowledge of supply and demand to decide when to trade them away, and when to trade for them. I'd say that because markets are so very difficult to predict, I mean, that's why economists get paid so heavily. Because that is true, I would definitely not recommend people who are not very experienced with the game trying to make money off of the newer cards. If you want to make the decks, of course, go ahead and make them. But be judicial, whatever that word is. Be very cautious about how much you trade for them and when you trade for them. This trick that I'm about to teach you has a couple of prerequisites, and the first is planning ahead. It's very simple. You just have to do your research, know what comes out when, and just be always on top of the latest news about Yu-Gi-Oh cards. The other prerequisite is being able to spot a good card when you see it, or a good archetype, or a good deck. If you guys would like me to make a video on how to spot a good card or a good archetype, definitely shoot me a thumbs up on this video and a comment right down below, and if I get enough demand, I will supply. So the concept in question here is one with a very obnoxiously technical name. It's called cross-price elasticity of demand. Now it sounds crazy, but it's actually pretty easy to understand. What it means essentially is that the price and demand for one card often depends on the price and demand for another card. This concept itself also relies on another, which is that two Yu-Gi-Oh cards will always have one of two relationships to each other. They will either be a substitute for each other, or they will have a complement relationship. A substitute is a card that you are likely to use instead of another card, and a complement is a card that you are likely to use with another card. And though there are cards that seem like they have absolutely no relationship, I'd argue that every card falls under these categories. Take, for instance, Snow on Light of Dark World and the Agent of Mystery Earth. These are two cards that seem to have very little relationship to each other, other than the fact that they're floaters. Kind of. But when you look closer, you'll realize that they have a strong substitute relationship. And that's because if the number of people playing Dark World goes up, that means that the number of people playing Agents will probably go down, and vice versa. Which means that if the demand for Snows is going up, that means that the demand for Earths is probably going down. A great example of how substitute and complement relationships work is Starlight Road. Starlight Road is a substitute for Huge Revolution is Over, since people are likely to use Starlight Road instead of Huge Revolution is Over. Stardust Dragon is a very good complement to Starlight Road, since if you're using Starlight Road, you're very likely to use Stardust with it. And this is the first thing that I want to teach you guys about making a profit using cross-price elasticity of demand. When I saw that this format was going to be a very slow format, I immediately started stocking up on Stardust Dragons. Why? Because slow formats mean lots of traps. Lots of traps means people using Starlight Road. And Starlight Road means Stardust Dragon. So I knew that Stardust Dragon, which at the time was about $7, was going to start going up in price. Stardust Dragon is now around $12, and I've made a $5 profit off of that. So all you have to do is understand what's going to be coming out in the future, how the format is going to be changing in the future, and then observe what cards are substitutes and what cards are complements. Another great example of how complementary relationships can make you a really good profit in Yu-Gi-Oh! And being able to predict them is really important, was Gungnir. Back in late spring and early summer, Gungnir was about a $5 to $7 card. But recently, it's become an $18 card. I got this card back then because I saw the release of, or the announcement of the Mermail archetype and the Atlantean archetype, and I figured any card that discards water monsters as a cost would be very good as a complement to those. And Gungnir definitely fits that description. So I got this Gungnir when it was available to me, and now I have made a $13 profit off of it. So it's a very easy concept to understand, and all it requires is for you to plan ahead. Look at what packs are coming out in the future. Look at what archetypes are going to be good in the future, and that will tell you what kind of things you should be getting now. And yes, those cards won't be very pricey now, and you'll have a binder full of a lot of low-priced stuff now, but in the future, when those decks do come along, you will suddenly have a binder full of things that people really want, and you can sell them and make a monetary profit or make all the decks that you want. As far as substitution goes, there are a couple of things that you should pay attention to with substitution that will help you know when to trade off cards that you already have. Knowing when reprints are likely to come out is a good thing to know about when you should trade substitutes, because reprints of a card are a substitute for the original version. People are going to start using reprints because they're cheaper. If you have the original version and you don't know that the reprint is coming out soon, it could be really useful to learn how to predict when Konami is going to make those reprints and make a very well-informed decision about when to trade off those cards. The other time that a substitute often happens is when a better version of a card comes out, or when people predict that a better version of a card comes out. The example I'm going to use isn't very good because Nightbeam turned out to be a worse version of MST, but when Nightbeam was just about to come out in Galactic Overlord, the prices of the holo MSTs dropped a little bit. And that's because people were expecting a substitution effect, where people started using the Nightbeam instead of MST, and MST dropped in price. That turned out to be a bad example because of Nightbeam, of course, turning out to not be as great, but that gives you an example of how the substitution effect is important when deciding how and when to trade cards. So that is what I have for you guys. I'll probably have a couple of supplements for this video later because there are a couple of other things I need to cover, including a little more about willingness to trade. But until then, that is the best way that I have found to build up my binder and make a profit in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I never needed to scam anybody, and I never needed to pull anything especially great. So I hope the same thing works for you. Remember to be smart and be careful, especially when you're dealing in new and hyped up cards. And until my next video, this is the RJB0 signing out.